UnCanadian by Be Constant. Collapse. Part 1. I gasped, steadying myself. I hadn't even noticed I was holding my breath. She beamed at me, eyes wide and pleading like a kid with a secret to spill. Her tone was bright, eager, as if she were trying to put me at ease. I looked at James, the one person who should have been beside me, sharing this moment. I searched for something. Wonder, excitement, even the smallest flicker of curiosity. But he gave me nothing. He only scowled, and the loneliness inside me deepened. He felt miles away even when he was right next to me. "I get you." She nodded, her big happy face bobbing as her ponytail bounced in agreement. Her voice was so confident, like she actually believed it. "You want me to hurry up and get on with it? Is it a boy or a girl? Do you want to know now or wait for the surprise?" A tiny grunt from James, barely audible but sharp enough to slice through my excitement. A warning. That sound, it was nothing and yet it was everything. A warning. For a second I'd forgotten about him, focusing on something other than him, our baby. If I hadn't been so tuned to him, so hyper-aware, I might have missed it. But I didn't. I never did. Here I choose to ignore him. I refused to let it take hold. I'd done this before, pretended I didn't notice, but he continued on, sighing, grunting. Each sound was a sharp little jab. James wasn't cruel, just misunderstood, because genius was like this, wasn't it? Unpredictable, explosive, difficult. The greats, Beethoven, Chopin, Rachmaninoff, weren't easy men, but their music, profound. James had that in him. I knew it. Any day now, he would finally break through, and then everything would make sense. I kept my eyes on the screen, willing myself to stay in this moment. If James only turned his head a few degrees and looked at that screen, he'd witness magic. This moment could save everything. I saw it, our future, a perfect happily ever after. That honest, pure, protective love. Once he gave into it, he would be unstoppable. Maybe when he held her, felt her tiny fingers curl around his, something would shift. Then he'd love her. All he had to do was listen. Hear the laughter and joy all around us, parents in other rooms seeing their child for the first time, going through this exact same moment. That kind of emotion is contagious, right? Any moment now, he'd join in on the excitement. He'd see this perfect, precious little person. He'd grab my hand, and we'd sit together, pointing at the screen in unison. We'd stare into each other's eyes, overflowing with love. People change when they have something to fight for. James would go back to his music with renewed passion. He'd feel inspired, bringing a fresh energy to his work. I'd lose myself in maternal bliss, and we'd be happy again. The tech, oblivious, kept performing like she was the host of some game show. I wished I could just enjoy this moment like she seemed to, but James's presence was like an anchor, pulling me back. It was always like this. No matter how much I tried to make things work, he always had a way of making everything feel like a performance. Maybe I had become numb to it over the years. Maybe I hadn't noticed it until now. I felt like I was supposed to laugh, play along. The room was waiting for me to react, but James had thrown me off. I hesitated just a beat too long. The tech's smile faltered, just slightly as she glanced at me. I forced a small smile. "This moment will change your life forever. This is it. This is the moment you'll talk about for the rest of your life. Last chance. Are you sure you're ready?" She was practically vibrating, bouncing on the balls of her feet. Her whole body coiled like a spring wound, too tight, on the verge of snapping. I could almost hear her heartbeat as she leaned in, grinning from ear to ear. Her nails, too long and too perfect, tapped a staccato rhythm against the buttons like she was playing a slot machine, desperate for the big win. One click. That's all it would take. The answer glowed on the screen, taunting me. Her breath turned shaky. One click. Just one. And then everything would change. Yes! The word burst out of me, wild and giddy. I couldn't hold it in. I let out a tiny squeal before I could stop myself. The young woman's words hit me like a shockwave, a thunderbolt straight to the center of my belly, sending shivers rippling outward. My fingertips tingled, my toes curled. This was it, the big moment. I couldn't help it. Mr. Grumpy Man would have to wait. What else could he do? No one would make a scene here, not in the baby ward. I'd deal with his outburst later in private behind closed doors. I was going to be a mummy. His eyes burned into me like heat lamps. A slow, creeping realization settled over me. He always sat like that, slouched, defiant, like good posture was just another rule he refused to follow, like sitting was some kind of battle and he was determined to win. But win what exactly? My own eyelids fluttered, suddenly frantic. I had ignored him, and now he was letting it build, letting the rage simmer and coil inside him, feeding off itself. I knew this brink too well. He was right there, teetering at his limit, and he was telling me without a single word that it was time to go. His lips curled, just barely, a tight, cruel little hint of a smile. He was enjoying this. He was doing this. This wasn't just about anger. This was about control, about showing me without a doubt that he wasn't thinking about anyone but himself. He couldn't see his mistake, couldn't even fathom that he might be the one in the wrong. No, he needed to be superior, to keep playing the game. I knew that look too well. It had been like this before. Whenever he felt cornered, like everything was slipping away from him, he'd lash out, retreat, or shut me out entirely, no matter the cost, no matter the sacrifice. Because it never stopped. Not really. This game ran 24 hours a day, a constant pulsing undercurrent beneath everything. It never slept. It had no off-limits. His unblinking stare was a reminder of that. James didn't want to be here. He was making that painfully obvious. And now it seemed the happier I became, the more determined he was to drag me back down with him. Then he started to fidget, tapping his fingers, at first just a light rhythm, then harder, faster, more erratic, like his body was withdrawing from something powerful, something addictive, something I could never quite name. This was how he always acted right before he snapped. I'd hoped things would be different this time, but I knew better. Calm. I tried to breathe. Maybe I was imagining things, reading into the smallest details, always expecting the worst-case scenario from James. I didn't need to worry. He was in public. James's mood might be bad, to me, but he wouldn't cause an outburst. Not here. We were in a hospital on the baby floor. This was sacred ground, a sanctuary for all pregnant women. James wouldn't ruin this wonderful moment. That would be unthinkable. Oh, do we need all this? Seems like a lot of unnecessary bullshit. Can we get on with it? Hurry it up. He had shifted, his posture changing. Now he sat in a more controlled, more threatening display of his anger, arms folded, back straight, a stern presence that made me immediately alert. He sat like a regal grand king on his throne. "We could sit here and waste more time," he snapped, his voice a ferocious bark. Others just didn't get James, I reminded myself. I was the expert. I knew how he worked, how to react, how to slip into that caregiver mode without missing a beat. I'd learned to be patient over the years, to wait for the right moment, to read the signs. He hated being told what to do, hated being pushed. But if I didn't step in, he'd spiral. So I'd learned to hold my breath and hold him together every time. The longer that attendant stood there, silent and unresponsive, the angrier James would get. I could feel it building inside him. I sat there unsure of what to do next. Should I step in now and take the wrath later in private, or let him release his frustration more quietly? He couldn't lose it here, not in public. Maybe he'd get rude, sure, but not that loud, emotional mess he could become. Not here, not in front of this nice young woman, not like this, not expecting this amount of hostility. The young woman stammered. "My job is showing parents the first images of their unborn child." She gave a weak reply as her voice failed her, a scared whisper. "This should be the most important moment of your life, not a waste of time." I hesitated, my thoughts a tangled mess as I looked down at my hands, trembling despite myself. I could feel James's rage, burning through the shocked silence he had created. For a moment, I wondered if anyone would ever understand. "You're judging me, aren't you? You think you see it so clearly. What's happening here? Do you pity me? Are you shaking your head saying, 'Come on, Casey, wake up'? But tell me, what would you have done? Would you have fought back right there in the baby ward? Would you have risked setting him off? Or would you have done what I did? Breathe, smile, pretend everything was fine, because I can tell you this much, it doesn't end here. If you think you know how this ends, you don't. So stay. Watch. See for yourself.